Hello, my gentle and of course very modern apes. My name is Erica. I'm Gutsy Gibbon, and today what you are fixing to see is a chunk from a big stream that I did. Like, I don't know how long it would be when you're watching this video, but to me, it was like last week. I did that stream to raise money for fieldwork that I was going on, and then also that a friend of the channel was going on. And if you're seeing this video, that means I'm currently out doing that fieldwork, and I wanted to have some stuff to release whilst I was absent. These videos are releasing once a week for the following month. I know when you're watching that may not matter, but as they're releasing, I want my audience to kind of get a grip on what's going on, so that's why I'm explaining it. There's also other videos releasing. I've got like a nice two a week pattern going on. Don't get used to it. But all of that to say that the video you're about to see is an unedited chunk from that stream where me and a bunch of my friends bust creationism with regard to Tiktaalik. If you want to watch the whole stream, it's like 11 hours long and you can find it like on my channel, but I wanted to release it in digestible chunks, like digestible by this channel standards. Again, these are unedited. I really just wanted to get them out there in smaller pieces, so there's gonna be some banter, there's gonna be some hiccups, but I hope you enjoy it. You can kind of think of it as like something to put on while you're cleaning your house, or your garage, or falling asleep. And while you're engaging in those luxurious activities, you can picture me, currently out in the dirt in West Kenya, scrounging around for cool fossils, genuinely having the time of my life. Thanks to you guys. Perfect. Okay, howdy. So Helmut Welke, what I say it was earlier, you guys, he is a...
You said Winky.
I said Winky. Okay, well, Welke is what it actually is. Helmut Welke is from Iowa. He is a retired engineering manager from Fortune 200 company, holding a BS and an MS degree in industrial engineering from the University of Illinois. It's always engineers. So naturally, what Helmut is here to talk about is how actually, here on Standing for Truth's channel, Tiktaalik rossae is not a compelling transitional species. So let's hear what he has to say about that. And how much you want to bet that the Zakelmi tracks come up? Because I bet it's 100%.
Oh, absolutely. I would be shocked if they didn't.
Let's get through at least 30 seconds, and then we'll touch on it. Yell if you can't help yourself.
Things that go on four legs. Well, in 1988, it was admitted we have not found any fossils that are intermediate between such clearly terrestrial animals and the strictly aquatic Ribillicidians, can't say it, I'm sorry, described in the previous chapter. In other words, to go from an amphibian to a tetrapod, a land animal on four stout legs.
When was Ichthyostega discovered?
Say again.
When was Ichthyostega discovered? Wasn't that in the 80s?
Ichthyostega was discovered, I'm checking it out right now. Ichthyostega was first discovered 1932.
Oh,
awesome. Also, have you noticed that he just, this was probably just a misspeak, but he also seemed to imply that purely aquatic Ripidisdians were amphibians, which basically would make the modern African and South American lungfish amphibians, but that's not true. This is a man who clearly does not know the very basics of what he's talking about.
Well, what you guys are going to see later in this video and in other videos that we go through, assuming we get to them, is that very frequently morphology, as used by these creationists who are covering it, is used in an eyeballing it method to the nth degree. They don't consider nested hierarchies. They don't know what synapomorphies even are, which for those of you who are watching, a synapomorphy is a shared derived characteristic between ancestor and descendant that links them. It is your through line. So for instance, a synapomorphy of all apes is a Y5 molar pattern. When you open up our jaws and you look at our molars, you see that we have a Y-shaped pattern, right? All apes share that, and all, like the common ancestor of all apes had that is proposed. So it's a shared derived characteristic that continues through the line. These guys don't know what synapomorphies are. They don't know what autapomorphies are, which are characteristics that define a specific, species. And they don't care to know. They don't know what plesiomorphes or symplesiomorphes are or any of that. And Helmut is really going to put that on display later here in the video. But yeah, as duly noted by Dapper, already he doesn't know the first thing outside. Like, I understand mispronouncing, right? But like outside of that, he also just doesn't know what he's talking about.
Look, here. I'm not going to knock on this guy for not knowing how to say Ripidistian. It's not an easy word to read or to say. Like, whatever. But to not know what a Ripidistian is, in contrast to an amphibian, even if you have trouble pronouncing the word, is unacceptable if you're going to be the guy who's going to overturn tetrapod evolution.
That's exactly it, right? That's exactly what the problem is that, you know, you don't get to come into the field, force yourself into the field, and also know nothing about it. You have to at least know the basics if you're going to rewrite the entire thing. All right, continuing.
2006, it was announced we have Tiktaalik, the fossil, the perfect missing link between fishes of the sea and amphibians and land creatures. And students are shown this, which is mostly imagination, to say it's really science. It's a creature emerging out of the woods, crawling on
we
very
have the full body.
And
like between, is it 3 individuals? We have basically the entire body of Tiktaalik.
Yeah, 3 individuals at that original site from 2006.
There's also the problem. There's also the problem that like Eusthenopteron, Ichthyostega, and I believe Acanthostega were all already discovered and create interesting points that connect. So like the Eusthenopteron is connected to Acanthostega and Acanthostega is connected to Ichthyostega. The through line between all of them is their labyrinthodont teeth and in part a tetrapod skull roofing pattern. So this is the thing that they don't understand, right? It's not just they look similar, but their similar characters nest and connect them through time. Which, you know, we'll get to that when we get to that. But I at least when I was in school was not shown this image alone. I was shown this image alongside usually Neil Shubin, the discoverer of Tiktaalik, holding the fossil, that most complete fossil. Yeah, that one exactly, Grayson.
Yep.
And are giving the impression that Tiktaalik is a virtual snapshot of a fish becoming a land animal. How can that really happen? And why would it happen? If a fish is so nicely adapted to the sea, why would it even want to go on land? Well, there are some animals that do have some features, but nobody calls them transitional forms. But today we have what's called.
Yeah, This is so there are a couple of things. One, why would a fish want to go on land? That's not how evolution works.
Yeah, I like the implied directional component of the morphology.
Yeah, but of course there are in fact reasons why it is advantageous for primarily aquatic creatures to be able to spend time on land. For one thing, sometimes your habitat dries up and you just got to go somewhere else or you're going to die. Sometimes you want to be able to escape aquatic predators, and especially if you're on a landmass where there just aren't large terrestrial predators, which is basically the case for like the evolution of tetrapods. The biggest predators were very large, but still not gigantic scorpions.
So the Devonian, right? The time period that we're looking at here, this is the time period when Tiktaalik is found. Eusthenopteron is also found in the Devonian, albeit a bit earlier, and we see Acanthostega and Ichthyostega as well during this time period. The Devonian is characterized by a couple of really important things. The first is the oxygen content in the water is extremely low, which is proposed to be one of the reasons why you see these adaptations to pull oxygen from the air as well. Arthropods have just recently colonized land. They're the only thing living on land other than plants at this time. And so as a result, if you're a little critter, a comparatively small animal already living on the coasts and in estuaries, a little bit further out is Dunkleosteus, who's going to eat you. So you want to stay close to the shore. As Dapper just said, a lot of these shore regions, these little inlets and stuff like that, can be prone to desiccation, to drying out. So not only do you need to be able to be close to this land, right, to avoid these predators, but you also need some kind of strategy to potentially escape these sudden dryouts. In addition to that, land has like arthropods on it that aren't being hunted by anything other than other arthropods, and they're virtually all smaller than you. If you're a little Tiktaalik or other like type of early tetrapod, right, being able to get out of the water even a little bit is going to put you at such a reproductive advantage to just about every other member of your population if you can do it right. You get more access to more food. You're eaten by less predators. You can avoid sudden desiccation events if they happen in the region in which you live. And I said earlier, like inlets aren't usually going to be like drying out or anything like that, but they might take an inlet to a smaller pool inland. And then if that dries out, you're going to need to be able to move around.
Yeah.
So there are a zillion reasons proposed. And indeed, it's probably a combination of all of them that led to pushing these early tetrapods to the coast and then selecting for adaptations that make them able to get out of the water.
Also, real quick, I'm calling dibs on the band name Devonian Desiccation. It's mine. You can't have it.
Damn. Okay, you win this round.
I think it's also the point where we mentioned that Iowa is full of Devonian outcrops and also things like Dunkelostheus and other reasons that you just listed to, the advantageous environmental.
The oceans of the Devonian were freaking scary, man.
Everything's trying to eat.
The oceans have been terrifying at any point in time, but
true.
I have been to one of the major Devonian exposures here in Iowa. It was pretty cool. It was revealed when a dam broke loose during a big rainstorm, and it just washed out a valley and revealed an entire reef. It's crazy.
That's so awesome. But like, the point being here is that we've got directionality, as John said, imposed on evolution here, asking like, why would a fish even want to get onto the land? Again, as we just explained, there are a million different reasons for selection to move a population of organisms inland and then select for characters, again, at the population level that makes them like okay at getting out of the water or manipulating their bodies in very shallow environments.
I mean, just look at lungfish or walking catfish.
Yeah, they do it now. That's a great point.
Yeah, just
my
look around.
favorite example is the leaping blenny. Have you ever heard of a leaping blenny?
Yes, very cool.
They're cute.
They're so weird. For anyone who doesn't know, they're a species of fish that is evolving to be more terrestrial in a completely novel way. It's awesome.
All right, hold on. I'm gonna pull a picture up of these. Yeah, I've definitely seen them.
Yeah, they flip themselves with their tails. They're so cool.
Like niche construction is like a pretty well characterized mechanism of evolution, like about like talking about the different things that would drive an organism to change its niche as a population, like from exploiting new opportunities, avoiding competition in an already overcrowded niche. Like it's pretty well understood what mechanisms drive this. So.
Well, and creationists accept this. That's what's so annoying about it, is that as long as it's within their narrowly defined, well, not narrowly defined, I guess I should say.
Narrowly conceptualized, but never defined.
Yeah, narrowly, exactly. Thank you, Dabber. Narrowly conceptualized, but rarely defined concept of created kinds. Organisms are allowed to do just that. They're allowed to undergo vast amounts of change and really adapt to new environments and experience this large-scale morphologic reshuffling, but they just don't like the examples that were predicted by evolution beforehand because they're scary and they show support for an idea that they don't like. But yeah, I think that's Doc, that's an awesome point, that this is still something that's happening currently. And the reason we don't call them transitionals is mostly just because they live right now, and we tend to conceive of transitionals as they're not real things, right? They're not biological entities in the sense that they're a universal category. We choose transitionals when we're saying we have ancestor A and descendant C. What would the midway point between those two look like for character one? You know what I mean? So that's what a transitional is. And in that way, a lungfish is a transitional, and an important one at that. We just don't know where it's going, do we?
No, but I'm excited to find out.
Yeah.
Especially since it's weird that lungfish are almost like living fossils, because we have them in every era post-Devonian.
We have
nuts.
lungfish, we have bashir, we have paddlefish and sturgeon, like all sorts of different incredibly primitive looking fish, right? And fish adjacent things, like tetrapod looking things. And they've found their niche that they continue to exploit. The importance of Tiktaalik and other tetrapodomorphs like it is that these guys hold those synapomorphies that create the through line between something like Eusthenopteron and things like Tulurpeton, tens of millions of years later. All right.
Fish, lobe-finned fishes, and they think these lobes, which are the front fins, do have some bones. They think that's evolving into legs. And because of these, some scientists were teaching that the first amphibians were descendants of lobe-finned fishes. And that's simply because there are some bones in those fins, but they're not connected to the backbone. They are just stiffeners in those fins.
So I would like to say really quickly, your humerus is not connected to your backbone. Right now, your humerus is not connected to your backbone. Your humerus connects to the pectoral girdle, not not to your spine.
With this, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, the last thing I was going to say about that is that it's not just that lobe-finned fish have bones, right? Teleost fish, which are the majority of fish that we think of, you know, like a nice little dinner plate looking guy with a tapered end with the tail and a little snout. These guys don't have like clear arm or leg bones. They don't have a humerus. They don't have a radius. They don't have an ulna. They don't have a femur. They don't have a fibula or a tibia. They don't have any of those. What separates lobe-finned fish from these guys, the Sarcopterygians, and what pinpointed them as a potential nice organism to be like the sea, the fish that leads to the tetrapod, right? Is that they have a humerus, they have a radius, and they have an ulna, like just very dwarfed, right? They're just these dwarfed versions of these bones, but they are homologous with the ones that we see.
They also have a working wrist.
Well,
yeah.
And doesn't Tiktaalik have pectoral and pelvic girdles too?
It does, which is actually an important thing, right? If you look at Eosinopteron, you notice it doesn't seem to have a pectoral girdle, right? But look where you can actually see, because this is like a diagram that has the skeleton underneath. Look where the front flipper fin or whatever actually connects. It's to the skull.
Yeah.
But that's because the pectoral girdle, the bones in there, the coracoid and the scapula, are homologous to the posterior most skull bones in other non-tetrapod fish. And Tiktaalik is itself a representation of some of the earliest separation of those skull bones from the rest of the cranium, creating a neck. No non-tetrapod fish is known to have, like, that's extant, has a neck.
Yeah.
Their their pectoral fins come right off of the skull. And that's where the bone connection to the axial skeleton is. It's through the skull. And the fact that tetrapods have taken these skull bones and moved them down posteriorly, so now the axial connection is disconnected from the rest of the cranium, is itself evidence of this transition. Right? He's pointing out things that are evidence of the transitional nature of Tiktaalik as if it doesn't count.
So I really want to point something out there too that is kind of mind-blowingly cool, at least in my opinion. So case in point, Dapper, the bones of the skull form by a different means of ossification than the bones of the rest of the body. I learned this in gross anatomy this time last year, like in the fall semester of last year. The difference is like endochondral versus intramembranous ossification. I think it's intramembranous. But basically the skull in all critters is intramembranous and everything else virtually is endochondral. I hope I'm not mixing those up, but I don't think I am. With one exception, and the exception is the clavicle. The clavicle is intramembranous like the skull because it used to be a part of the skull and still is in most fishes, right? So why would that be the case? And why is that transition recapitulated in these transitional fossils? That should not be.
Yeah, it's all these extra bits of data that only make sense if you conceptualize it in terms of common ancestry. And that's the thing, right? Life looks like it has common ancestry. If you want to argue that it doesn't, you still are stuck with the fact that it looks exactly like we would expect it to look if it did.
Precisely.
So just a question: which type of bone is the scapula?
I'm actually not sure. I have no idea. I know the clavicle is intramembranous. If what Dapper said is true, I would imagine that the scapula is also intramembranous like the skull, if it comes from the skull. I don't know if it is or not, though. I just remember the scapula from class. Intramembranous versus endochondral for anybody who wants to look it up. But yeah, I mean, and Dapper, you're totally right. Like, that's an important point to make, that everything looks as if it was evolved. And what you're going to see in this video and what we'll probably see in many later videos is that it is all accommodation from these people, right? All they're trying to do is find a way to force fit the data as we have it into this creationist point of view. Like, well, maybe, God designed Tiktaalik to look like that. Yeah, but with characteristics, like with synapomorphic characteristics that link it, right, to as this transitional species. Why? Why does it appear so deceptive?
The point that I always
if I'm understanding this,
oh, sorry, Doc.
Oh, sorry, just really quick. If I'm understanding this right, the scapula in humans forms partially by intramembranous methods and partially by endochondral methods. It's a mix of the two.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
So the point that I always like to bring up with Tiktaalik, right? And we'll see if he explains it in this video. Something tells me he won't. Is the fact that its transitional anatomic features were like predicted beforehand, and it was predicted what location we should be able to find it in what layer. Like, that would be such a huge coincidence if evolution was not true. Like,
yeah, I feel like that's this thing called the gold standard of science. I feel like that's a phrase I've heard in this context before.
Yeah, exactly. But like, as has been pointed out, right? Like, this is pretty unique in terms of like fossil anatomies go. I mean, it has several elements that are like a lungfish, like a sarcopterygian, but then, like Dapper was pointing out, this thing has like a neck. You can't really come up with many other fish specimens with necks. Even like people like to point out with mud skippers or blah blah. But like, come on, functioning wrist bones and a neck, like these transitional features were part of what was predicted beforehand. Like when they were predicting a fossil with transitional anatomy should be found in this specific layer, like way up in like Ellesmere Island in northern Canada. Like, to go there to make a prediction for what kind of anatomy you should find, and then to find it in the exact layer that you predicted you should find it in, and to find 3 specimens. I mean, that is just such a ridiculous burden for a young Earth creationist to try to accommodate into their worldview and explain how it is that we could use something like the theory of evolution to make a prediction that would then come true to like such a precise degree anatomically and the actual location of the specimens. Like, they can't explain that rationally.
Yeah, and this is really, it's not the only example, right? It's a great example. It's well known, and especially because it's a famous transitional species. But this is not the only case where we use geology, like knowing the age of those rocks and having a map of the interpreted environments. It wasn't just like, why did they go to that part of the island in the first place? They had interpreted this layer of Devonian rock as being the right kind of environment for finding such a transitional species. That also makes no sense if we're wrong about the interpreted environment of the rocks, right? And beyond this, we can look at other examples, especially in the Neoproterozoic, where you have the earliest evolution of animals when they're still microscopic, right? Identifying when and where those evolved, it's the same story. Looking, for example, at the Deschanto formation and so forth, where we push back what appeared to be the Cambrian explosion by knowing where to look and what kind of environment. So this is like repeatedly a repeated exercise, I would say, in interdisciplinary exercise.
Well, and a couple of notes on that too, but just before we go, right? Like, I want to make a note first on what you just said there, John, because yeah, it's those predictions that we made using geology too implicitly rely on quote unquote evolutionary assumptions, right? We use things like radiometric dating and known sedimentation rates and like how the continents are thought to have moved by taking the current trajectory and moving it backwards in time. You have to have a lot of time to make that happen, right? And continents don't exactly move quickly. So we're getting these successful predictions by assuming evolutionary theory, even if it's not specifically related to evolutionary theory. It's a geological thing, right? But you're still, well, I guess it's more vice versa. You're assuming an ancient time scale. But, these kinds of things shouldn't continue to play out the way they do if the assumption is wrong, first of all. Second of all, what Grayson said, I want to make a note because they make this argument later with regard to whale evolution in a different video. But what they've been falling back on recently is that the reason Tiktaalik looks the way that it is because it's well suited for its transitional environment. It only appears to be transitional because it lives in a transitional environment between land and sea. But again, they cannot grasp this point of a synapomorphic characteristic or suites of synapomorphies, because Tiktaalik isn't thought to link Eusthenopteron to later tetrapods because it lives in a transitional environment. It's thought to link them because it has characteristics that were only found in Sarcopterygians like Eusthenopteron, and other characteristics that were only found in tetrapods, right? The only way that that kind of suite of characteristics exists, right, is if it's inheriting some of the characteristics from the ancestor and delivering some of the characteristics to the descendant as a transitional would. Furthermore, as you said, Grayson, as you correctly pointed out, those characters were predicted ahead of time by assuming evolution, right? So it's not just a creature, like it's not an example of homology, right? Like, or sorry, not homology. It's not an example of homoplasy, where it's like, oh, this creature has these transitional features because it was designed to be, designed homoplasty, I guess, where it's like it lives in this transitional environment. No, it carries the indelible stamp of its ancestors in the same way that you have certain genes from your parents that can be clocked as coming from your parents for like a specific eye color. And then you can also find somebody else who has a different entire genome but has the same eye color. This is a specific through line that links ancestor to descendant. And that they cannot grasp this. I don't know what the problem is. Sorry, that makes me bad.
They don't want to grasp it. That's the problem. It's not an intellectual deficiency in the sense of like they can't understand it. It's that if they were to grasp this, it would kind of defeat a large chunk of their identity, basically. Because remember, this isn't just an intellectual exercise for most creationists. This is a matter of your identity, right? To tell someone that the world isn't 6,000 years old and that, Genesis is not a literal history book and it cannot be relied on to tell you what actually happened in the past is for these people similar to calling into question things like who their parents are, like their gender or things like that, right? These are core parts of most creationists' identity. I know I was a creationist for a while. It was a core part of my identity for quite a while. And so anytime you challenge something that is that closely held that it becomes part of someone's identity, their sense of self, it is really hard to get them to realize what they're saying that's in error that contradicts the thing that they want to have as that closely held belief. And so, yeah, I don't think it's because they're dumb. I think it's that it challenges that core identity. And I'm now rambling, so I'll shut up.
I would like to.
You're fine. And sorry, really quick, Grayson. I do want to give a shout out to some of my personal role models in paleontology. Those being Mary Schweitzer, who is, as far as I know, still a very proud Christian, once young earth creationist, and Robert Bacher, who is still an ordained minister and publishing in paleontology. You can be Christian and accept science.
Yeah, you absolutely can be Christian and accept science, like the majority of Christians do. I just wanted to make the point on what Dapper was saying. It really, I think, is a case by case on whether or not the creationists are smart enough to grasp this or not. Because I've had a lot of discussions about Tiktaalik before with creationists, and I just wanted to share what is probably the most hilarious discussion that I've heard. This was not in one of my debates, but I recently debated the creationist who did say this, and I just had to share it with you guys because it's one of the funniest things I've seen. So, like, I'll bring up this point about how this was a predicted unique anatomy, right? Like what Erica was saying about, oh, well, it's found in a transitional environment, so that explains its transitional features. Oh, really? Then why don't we see these features at other transitional environments that we where Tiktaalik was living was not like a unique, like, there's like an estuary, like Riverlands, like, it's you could call it a transition environment, but you can go and see other types of environments through the geologic record and modern day, and you don't see anatomies like Tiktaalik there. And then I've also seen the other way that creationists try to get around this, right? Because essentially they have to explain this either as like a fabrication or a coincidence. Those are the only ways that I see them backing it down to this in any way that's, whatever. So I oftentimes will say it's fabricated. These are not real bones, or sometimes people will say, I've heard, these are juvenile alligator bones.
Oh my God.
The best one, right? The one I wanted to share was this creationist that I debated with last week. And previously he had said that the Tiktaalik skull is the skull of, and I quote, a kimono dragon.
Really?
So for your little thesis about how the creationists are smart enough to grasp what this discovery means, I think some of them are, and some of them
that's
need
fair.
a little bit of help.
A kimono
you just
dragon.
gave me psychic damage, Grayson.
Yeah.
How
Also,
did I miss that?
Even if we ignore the fact that it's Komodo and it's not a kind of lizard named after a Japanese women's wear item.
Yeah, people
the
actually
skulls of
were
Tiktaalik and any varanid are almost entirely different. There's so little overlap.
Yeah.
No, Dapper, you're gonna lose it later, specifically because later in this video, well, you might lose it. I lost it, but it was like later in this video, Helmut is gonna tell us what he actually thinks Tiktaalik is.
Oh, good.
And it
Don't
is
spoil.
not. I'm not gonna spoil it. I'm not gonna. We're just gonna keep watching. We're just gonna keep watching.
Well, I will say real quick, Grayson, you remember arguing with T-Rock about Tiktaalik?
Yes, unfortunately, I do.
I know you've spoken with T-Rock before, Erica. He always manages to give me a headache every time I listen to him. I don't know how he does it. T-Rock
has like, he says the most boneheaded stuff sometimes, but then he's very like he's very indignant about the idea that he might be wrong. So when you're like, no, T-Rock, that's not how that works, he's offended by that. Like I don't like.
I think Dr. Dan is in the room, by the way.
Dan is? Wait, how come I don't see him? Yeah. Oh my God. He's down at the bottom. Okay, hold on. Hey, Dan.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Oh, we're having an absolute ball. We've made it. We've been at this for 2 hours and 11 minutes, and we've made it through exactly 2 minutes and 22 seconds of this video.
To be fair, we didn't start the video until almost 2 hours in.
That is fair. So that is amazing. I'm so glad I got here in time to hear Kimono Dragon, because that is raw mat level. That is perfect.
Oh, Dan, the memes afterwards, like people were making like really actually like fantastic artworks of kimono dragons. It was amazing.
I actually now kind of want the ability to purchase a kimono with prints of Tiktaalik on it as like the design on the kimono.
I'm sure you can.
Sick, actually.
I am certain you can. You just gotta find it.
I want a Tiktaalik button down, or button whatever I wear, button down really bad. Okay, we gotta watch some more of this. We're watching more. I'm clicking play.
And so as they look at the evolution from fish to amphibians, these are some of the different animals that have been suggested are fossils. You can see over time, these have all been reclassified as either truly amphibians, nothing in between, or truly
I hate this already.
Fish, including coelacanths down there in the lower right. That was
So quick note. How does one define fish versus amphibian? Where are the lines and why do you draw them there? Because as you will see very shortly, Helmut does not know what the fish kind, or whatever he's proposing for this, what morphologic characters actually define it, and what morphologic characters define an amphibian, because Tiktaalik has both.
And also, I gotta point out, Ichthyostega and Acanthostega are not amphibians in the sense of members of Lysamphibia, which is what we think of as amphibians. These are stem. Ultimately, they're stem tetrapods. If you want to be very technical about it, the thing is that they're amphibious, but that's not the same thing as being an amphibian. Amphibians are a group of animals that share their own derived characteristics that are unique to them and are not shared by Tiktaalik, Ichthyostega, or Acanthostega, or amniotes like reptiles and mammals. They have their own distinct group of characteristics. They're all more closely related to each other than they are to anything else that's alive. And all of them are more closely related to each other than they would be to Ichthyostega, Acanthostega, Tiktaalik, or anything else on here. And also, why does coelacanth not get a generic designation? We just get like the general name of the entire group. Everything else is a genus.
Dapper, you know why.
Because consistency is
okay, that's true. Yeah, okay.
All right. Okay.
Say, Erica, a friend of the channel was hoping to join. Would you mind if I send him the link?
Yeah,
the specific person is in the chat. All right,
baby, I paid for StreamYard Plus just this morning, moments before, so we got the room. Why not? But I'm clicking play, so
supposedly a fish that went extinct over 360 million years ago, and it was on its way to becoming an amphibian. Only problem is we then found it. I guess extinct for 70 million years. But anyway, there is a lobe-fin fish. Living ones are found. It just shows, for one thing, it's a living fossil. Just because something disappears in the fossil record, like a coelacanth, for huge layers of time, does not mean that it was living somewhere on the Earth.
I get the implication that he thinks that that Sarcopterygians are only, like, that coelacanth is the only Sarcopterygian. Like, when he was like, we found a lobe-finned fish, it's
right.
coelacanth.
It's like really? Just like Erica, Lucy is the only Australopith, right?
Lucy's the only Australopith. She's the only one.
Same thing.
We don't have any others. So, I mean, we might as well just talk about that. How do we know what the skull looks like when we only have anyways.
I mean, maybe we should, maybe to clarify for anyone who isn't super familiar with lobe-finned fish, is coelacanth a family level distinction or is it an order?
Let me check.
I believe it's an order level because the family of the modern coelacanth is Latimeridae, and it's only got the few species that are alive today. And I believe it's the,
They're they're a member of Actinistina, and they are, there's actually an order. It's the coelacanthiforms.
Okay,
Coelacanthus is the genus, excuse me.
So to equate that to people who don't, or to anyone who, people interested in biology, like saying, oh, it's a coelacanth is like saying, oh, that's a carnivoran.
Yeah.
Like it's just this massive chunk of super diverse animals. Like,
yeah, that's like, wow, we finally found a single lobe-finned fish. They've been gone for 70 million years. Also, I'm really sick and tired of this, and I wish that we like nailed people in the head for this a little bit more often. But the coelacanth that we have today is not unchanged from the coelacanth that we know from 70 million years ago, right? It's very similar, but it's still been evolving because drift is happening. It's still changing to some degree, even if it's not experiencing like drastic selection in one way or another. The same goes for Devonian lungfish.
It also has undergone some significant selection because modern Latimeria, which is the genus to which all extant known coelacanths belong, is a deep sea genus. All known fossil coelacanths are from shallow water marine or freshwater environments. It has a very different lifestyle and environment to the Mesozoic coelacanths that we know, Paleozoic coelacanths that we know about. So that's part of the reason why it is not the same. In fact, if you look at modern Latimeria coelacanths in a lineup of all the coelacanths that we know about, they're pretty unusual for the group.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, creationists look at it and they're like, fish? Extinct fish still here? Evolution destroyed. Like, that's the termination of the argument.
This argument, like, I hear this being brought up so many times by creationists. Like, they have a really difficult time with this, like, living fossils kind of thing. They think it's such a defeater, but like, when you understand that selection tends to keep things optimized on fitness peaks, then if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, it makes sense that you would have these instances of stasis where there's like stability over an ecological niche for like millions of years that you wouldn't expect to see, like, large scale morphological differences like in groups that are occupying the same ecological niche that hasn't changed. I mean, they're going to be optimized for that niche. And this is perfectly in line with evolution. And I hear this brought up all the time, like it's some sort of huge issue. And it's just like, tell me you don't understand evolution without telling me you don't understand evolution.
So it's baked into evolution. Literally, it's a facet of natural selection, right? Like natural selection, we're looking at how an environment impacts a population of organisms and selects for those who are, that you create differential reproductive success, and you end up with critters that are more well adapted to the environment in which they live. But because the environment is what's doing most of the selecting there, and it's natural selection, then if the environment doesn't change, evolution predicts that they don't change either, right? Like it's an implicit relationship that's core to the idea.
Also,
and, like, there's another group of.
Sorry about that, Doug. I just gotta say, like, my battery percentage has been dropping precipitously. I don't know how much longer I can stay out here. My phone kind of feels like it's about to catch fire at any minute streaming this. So if I just drop out all of a sudden, just know that was probably what it was.
Thanks for joining, yeah, thank you for being here with your clock ticking, your imminent demise.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, like, while I'm like literally in the middle of like a road trip out in, Colorado wilderness. So thanks for allowing the extended circumstances for me to join here.
Of course.
Yeah.
All right.
Keep an eye out for bears.
I'm fixing to hit play. We going.
Hey, 1938. The front fins or lobes are still fins. It's 100% fish. Nobody
it lives at the bottom of the ocean.
There's the fossil.
I know we only made it seconds, but that is a point that needs to. Dapper, take this one. I'm getting more water.
Okay, look, if you want an appendage to change morphologically, there has to be some pressure for it to change. What would a coelacanth do with a leg at the bottom of the ocean? These guys aren't crawling around like crabs or trilobites or something. They're getting their food in the water column above the surface of the ocean, but in the deep water. What possible use would a leg be, right? You can see, like, we watch in the fossils, you can watch legs become fins in the first place, in the second place, I guess. Watch the evolution of things like ichthyosaurs or whales, right? You know the reason they don't keep legs? It's because there's not much point if you're going to live your entire life in the water column, hunting things in the water column. What in the world would a coelacanth do with a foot? There's no good answer.
Even to that end, though, Dapper, like, even on that, though, Dapper, coelacanths, like, they're lobe-finned fishes. They use their fins as legs underwater. Like, they use it to brace themselves against rocks.
That's true. In fact, actually, even non-lobe-finned fish, even ray-fin fish will do that, too. But,
true.
Yeah, like, if you want to have something evolve, there has to be a reason for that, for selection to favor that thing, right? Unless it's just going to be genetic drift. But in that case, drift isn't going to get you from a fin to a leg. And so, of course they don't have legs. If they did, that would itself be suspicious. Why would something have identifiable legs after living the lifestyle of a coelacanth? And I don't have any reason why it should. And also, evolution is not orthogenetic, right? This idea that all lobe-finned fish should be evolving towards tetrapod is an idea of orthogenesis. Science abandoned orthogenesis like before World War I. Right? We're talking about like a century long, maybe not quite a century, but like a century ago, abandoned idea. And one of the things that helped us abandon it was people actually bothered to do statistical studies on the fossils of various groups of organisms that were thought to be undergoing orthogenetic change. So what orthogenesis is it's sort of like the idea of momentum, but applied to evolution, right? So the classic example of orthogenesis was brontotheres, which was this group of really cool ungulates from South America. And so the idea was, well, they went extinct because they kept evolving to be bigger and having fancier and fancier head ornamentation. And eventually they couldn't support their big fat heads, and so they all just died because they just kept evolving that way. But the immediate problem with that is like, well, that runs entirely contrary to natural selection. And so people did studies. They said, is there actually a tendency in brontothere groups towards larger size and fancier head ornamentation? And the answer is, while it does happen occasionally, overall in the group, no, there is no trend like that. And that helped us back away from this. But with this guy, the only reason he could think that Latimeria should have developed feet is if he thinks it's predestined that all lobe-finned fish will eventually evolve into tetrapods, which is completely opposite of what the modern theory of evolution would say about that entire idea. There is no orthogenesis.
I would even argue that like evolution as outlined by Darwin would not suspect. They like would adamantly oppose the idea. Like not even modern evolution, any evolution, of it.
Yeah, the whole idea.
Not a single stage since not a single year since Origins was published would somebody come out and say, I suspect that the coelacanth should have by now developed feet miles underneath the surface of the sea.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna let him go.
Up above, there's the fish, a coelacanth fish. But they really thought they were on to something. They gave up on coelacanth. Some of those other examples I gave you. Finally, 2006, we have Tiktaalik.
Gave up on coelacanths. What does that mean?
What
does it mean?
Does he think that we thought coelacanth was the common ancestor? Like,
I guess. But as far as I know, that's never been the idea.
No, you know what, Dapper? Here's what it is. He did think that coelacanth is the ancestor because remember he said that we found a lobe-finned fish. He thinks coelacanth has to be because he doesn't know there are other lobe-finned fish around. So coelacanth would have to be the fish.
Do you think he even knows that like modern lungfish are also lobe-finned fish?
No, not a chance.
I don't think so.
Wow. Okay, so this guy knows way less than even I thought when I pointed out at the beginning that he didn't know nearly enough to have this conversation.
Well, Dan, I'm going to give you, now that you're here, Dan, everybody who he hasn't introduced himself yet, but he's an evolutionary biologist. And Dan, I'm going to give you one guess. What do you think Helmut's profession is?
This dude is an engineer. 100% he's an engineer.
Well done. You called it.
Well done. 100%. 100%.
So I'm a little bit confused. I thought the direction this guy might be going was just to emphasize something about living fossils and evolution not working in that sense. But maybe that doesn't seem to be the case. It's quite different. And it might be worth pointing out that this term living fossil is kind of misappropriately applied to the coelacanths and arises from the fact that we find fossil genera of these before we have a bigger understanding of the extant ones. But in fact, they're not really living fossils, right? Based on what we know now about their paleontological record and their morphology. Sorry.
Well, yeah, they're not. It's we touched like briefly on this earlier, right? But they're not unchanged, right? These are organisms that are that have still been changing, have still been evolving in different directions and undergoing drift and experiencing all sorts of different pressures around them, be them environmental or otherwise, right? Or social. Talking about non-coelacanth critters. But yeah, you're gonna see he's gonna take this in an interesting way, and he's gonna say some outright wrong stuff here in a minute that I think Dapper's gonna love it. So we'll let him go.
Evolutionists said the lobe-finned fishes clumsily crawled out of water and onto land 300 to 380 million years ago, like Tiktaalik, a new fossil. Dr. Shubin from the University of Chicago was the lead researcher looking for this fossil. And here's his picture with the fossil, the Tiktaalik. There are actually 3 creatures found. This is the best one. And he's holding it there next to his head, like this is my buddy. And of course, it helped him get some fame and funding. So supposedly, what did Tiktaalik have? That it could breathe using simple lungs. Dr. Shubin actually said that.
That's
the front fins are able to support its weight. That's what all the drawings.
Bony fish. Having lungs is basal to bony fish, right? The modern bony fish who don't have lungs have swim bladders that evolved from the lungs. There's a reason that embryologically, both lungs and swim bladders start out as little pockets coming out of the digestive system, right? And in fact, even now, many fish who are ray fin fish who have swim bladders but don't have lungs will still gulp air into their digestive tract because it still retains the ability to absorb limited amounts of oxygen. And if you're living in an oxygen-deprived water, air might help. Sorry, go ahead.
There's a reason why he's characterizing the tetrapod trait as having lungs. You're going to see in a second.
Oh, good.
Oh,
right.
no.
Oh, no. This is going to be painful.
Pictures used to describe it show, and that there are enough finger-like bones making an arm and a wrist and fingers that are becoming, in those front fins, becoming legs. And then, it has a flattened skull with the eyes on top, like some salamanders or other amphibians. So they're saying this is the perfect transitional.
Just not going to mention the pectoral
Not
girdle.
everybody's heard about it, but among evolutionary circles, it's becoming pretty famous, and it's getting
becoming in the process of becoming famous. Tiktaalik rose in this year of our Lord 2024 is becoming famous amongst evolutionary biologists when it was discovered in 2006. But the pectoral girdle stuff, that's coming too.
Oh, okay, good.
into the school books now as well. So I want you to remember this name, Jennifer Clack, because at the time she was considered one of the world's experts on the evolution of fish to amphibians. And so Jennifer Clack, who was not in the actual study group, the finders of the Tiktaalik fossils, but she got all excited about it because this is her field, and she said, Tiktaalik had lobed fins like the coelacanth, and it would have breathed like a lungfish, said Jennifer Clack.
Yeah?
But that's based on all.
So again, that goes completely over his head, right? That lungfish or sarcopterygians that breathe air, completely over his head. He doesn't care about it, but
and also that lungfish were more closely related to tetrapods than either tetrapods or lungfish are to coelacanths. I'm just going to point that out.
So here's our punchline here, Dapper.
And his disclosures. But if you go to the University of Chicago official websites and look at some of the technical papers that the public doesn't always see or hear about, there's no way of knowing if Tiktaalik had lungs based on the fossils.
Okay, yeah, but you know what else that's true for? Almost everything. We have no way to know from the fossils that T-Rex had lungs. I bet you it did. We don't know if Australopithecus afarensis had lungs from the fossils, but you know what? I bet it did. Did Smilodon have lungs? I don't know. We don't have fossilized Smilodon lungs. That's not how we figure out if things had lungs.
Wait, Dapper, I thought Tiktaalik did have preserved lung material.
Actually, if that's true, then I didn't know about it. And in that case,
I think at least one of the specimens does.
So someone here get on that, and let's take a look and see if we can't find that out. The punchline for me here was very simple, and it's very similar to what you were just saying, Dapper, because I was like, wait, almost nothing has preserved lungs. We infer that it has lungs, which he's, dunking on right here and on this slide. We infer that it has lungs because of its external morphology that is preserved, that in every critter that has it, there are lungs. So exactly it has the spiracles in the it's like in the an otic notch, right? It's like the otic notches and the spiracles up there, which lungfish have, and they use them to suck air into their lungs. So what
was it doing with them?
What is it doing with them?
Erica, you have to understand that information was hidden from the public in the technical papers. You gotta have at least
that are publicly available.
Exactly. You have to have at least a bachelor's degree in engineering to be able to understand them.
Yes.
For sure. A man that doesn't know that lungfish are sarcopterygians needs a bachelor. He's the one who's finally bringing this out of the darkness of the evolutionist chambers and into the light. And look at what he says here. Schumann admits this and explains it was only an inference, arguably made out of necessity. So you look at the external morphology, you know that everything that has that external morphology breathes using, it's like lungfish that pull the air in and pull it into their lungs. And then that's an inference. As Dapper said, in that case, it's an inference assuming that anything with nostrils, with nasal conchae, with a mandible that has an opening at the back to allow a trachea up, or a pharynx and a larynx up. Right? That's all inference.
At this level, did it have eyes? We don't know. It's an inference.
We don't know. Did it have eyes?
Inference. Everything that isn't a bone that we didn't find actually falsified is just an inference, apparently. And
You're
like,
literally
technically, yeah, you can say that, but like, what was it doing with those orbits if not putting eyes in them?
Literally, I love that. We don't know that it had eyes. Assuming that Tiktaalik had eyes is totally inference. It has orbits, which in everything that has orbits, they're for eyes, right? That's fine. It's just totally an inference.
That's actually a great analogy right there, the orbits and eyes thing, because what Tiktaalik had, the famous specimen, the specimen that everyone's seen, what that had is called imbricate lungs. Imbricate lungs. Everything that has those types, imbricate ribs. So it's a specific type of rib cage. Mm-hmm. Everything that has that type of rib cage, what do you think it surrounds, if you had to guess?
It's lungs. Because the way you're pumping the lungs is by pulling the ribs up and down, and that's how you're breathing.
It's the type of rib cage that's connected in such a way that can expand and contract with muscles, right? Every type of rib cage.
You got to that before I could, and
Oh, and the thing is, other than mammals, that's basically how everything with lungs breathes. Mammals are weird, but like that's how lizards breathe. That's how frogs are weird too, but that's how salamanders who have lungs breathe. I mean, it's how lungfish breathe. Sorry.
Dude, I'm stuck on it, right? Like, this thing had a mouth, but if it had a tongue in there, that's just inference, right? Like we can't know that.
If it had a stomach, that's an inference. We know.
Can't know it had a brain. Like all of that is inference. Throw the whole field out. It's all garbage anyways.
All you know from the fossil is that it died. That's all you can know.
That's all you can tell. No, even that, because it's only inference to assume it was ever alive, Dapper. We don't know that.
It could be an intricate bone-shaped carving made by pre-flood humans. Who knows?
We're all the way back to like the it was like around Aristotle's time, where it's like fossils were just these, and like fossil shells and things like that were just rocks attempting to imitate bones, right? It's just...
Well, actually, Joel Duff had a really good video about that very idea of like, on the same basis that that creationists have this radical skepticism about anything that is a part of geology or paleontology that contradicts their point. If they were to actually apply that consistently, they couldn't say that fossils are even the remains of organisms. Because when they look at things like, well, maybe this fine-grained, non-flocculated shale was actually the result of a raging torrent. Well, okay, yeah, but by that level of, skepticism, maybe the skeleton of a dinosaur is actually just a naturally occurring flood debris that just kind of happened to arrange itself into the shape of a skeleton. Maybe.
Yeah. It's like, is that technically possible? I guess, but no one would propose that.
Not even the creationists.
Erica, I think Mr. Anderson is here.
Oh, I didn't even know. Damn it. The same thing happened with you, Dan. I couldn't see that you were here because you were so far, like, I have to scroll down. All right, hold on. Hi, Mr. Anderson. Welcome.
Hello.
Everybody, this is Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson is a lawyer, so we love his argumentation skills around here.
Oh, I'm honored to be a part of the team science.
Speaking of which, let's let Helmut continue here. I'm sure it's going to get more reasonable.
Shubin admits this and explains, well, we think it had on its way to becoming lungs because, well, we needed it to, otherwise it wouldn't exist on land.
No, it already had lungs.
Flop around like a fish and die. So Shubin admits that this was only an inference, arguably made out of necessity for his theory to fit the story.
No, that's not what that means. The necessity is out of anatomical necessity. There are certain skeletal features that are necessarily associated with soft tissue features, right? Like if you have a muscle attachment point for a bicep, then of necessity, there must have been a bicep connecting to that muscle attachment point. Do you have direct physical evidence of the bicep itself preserved? Probably not. But what the hell else is a bicep attachment point for?
This is really basic comparative method stuff, right? This is a situation where every time you see something in the living world today, it is associated with A. So when you find that in a fossil, right, you can say that in the fossil, it was most likely associated with A. But the way that it's being characterized here is so nefarious by Helmut, right? Like he's like, oh, they really had to force fit it. It's like, again, the orbit eye thing is such a perfect example because you could say that to Helmut and he would have no recourse. You could say, why do you think that the orbits held eyes? And he would say, because in everything that has orbits today, We find eyes in them. True. And in everything today that has this specific type of rib cage and this specific otic notch that contains a spiracle, we find like air-breathing sarcopterygians. Only air-breathing sarcopterygians have them. So where's the leap? Where's the leap of logic? It's so silly.
This really does drive home the point that I think that you guys are speculating about this Hellman guy, about him not knowing anything about modern day sarcopterygians or lungfish or coelacanths or anything, because like in his conception, Tiktaalik had to have like half of a lung or something, but like it seems so clear that this guy does not know that coelacanths, not terrestrial at all, coelacanths have lungs.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and
I
also
would,
just this is something that I hate, that I'll just say creationist preachers, because I don't have a problem with people who follow a religion. Go ahead, that's your right. That's good for you. But I hate when people like Donnie and this guy just lie and say we need to find evidence to support our a priori assumptions. Like, if the evidence were different, we would believe differently. Like, that's how science works. You follow the evidence.
Well, this is like, I know I've been talking about it on Twitter, and I've been talking about it with the science friends as well. But over the past week, I read Origin like cover to cover for the first time, and one thing that was very striking to me is something that's always been pointed out, but never really sunk in until I actually read it, which is that the whole thing is laid out like an argument. I mean, Darwin is just making an argument. That's all he's doing. And that's why, and this went over my head for so many years, that's why he starts with domestication. Because we argue with creationists, the concept of starting with domestication to prove evolution, for lack of a better term, seems silly because everybody accepts domestication. But when you see the way that Darwin lays it out from point A to point B, it's seamless. I mean, the guy got plenty of stuff wrong in there, don't get me wrong, but it is seamless, the argument that he makes for natural selection in the wild by using domestication as that first step. But, that's what I'm trying to say here. He came to the conclusion that natural selection is what more or less led to the origin of species because of the argument that he laid out previously, that he spent the entire first half of his life observing, considering, and synthesizing. This isn't like a, ooh boy. I mean, like Helmut, I don't want to impose it on him, but I feel like he'd be the type that's like, well, you just want to sin, and that's why you're an evolutionist. And it's like, my God, you couldn't be further from the truth. Like, you don't know the first thing about the theory if that's what you're proposing. Dapper, you're muted if you're talking.
I wasn't.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I was silently agreeing while also sipping some hard iced tea because this guy drove me to break out the harder stuff, although it's like 8 proof, so it's not crazy.
I honestly thought it wasn't even going to be White Claw o'clock until we got to Ramat, but I'm seeing now that we're going to get there a lot faster than I thought.
No, yeah, it's already there. The whole, like, we don't even know if it had lungs. It's just an inference. That broke
just a timing question for everybody, because I am going to have to leave in a little bit to, like, make dinner and stuff, because I'm all the way, in Eastern time, so it's a little bit earlier for me. But is this going to be going on later on? Because if we're still doing, Ramat later on, like, in 3 hours, then might have to come back.
Yeah, wait, I might run out for like 10 minutes just so I can run to the gas station and get a 6-pack.
Listen, you guys can do absolutely whatever you want. I am the anchor here. This is the mothership. I'm on it. I will. If you guys got to leave, I can handle it. It's all good. We're gonna go until we feel like stopping. And there's videos that I the list of videos that we have, because we have many of them. Some are going to be higher priority than others, so we don't have to do all of them. I am more than flexible, so we'll discuss as we go. But
all right, let's hear more. Let's hear more of this guy. Let's see if we can.
Without lungs, Tiktaalik would not be a good candidate as a transitional form to land animals, and there is no evidence for lungs. There is evidence for gills, shown by these rod-like bones which help pump water over the gills. So a detailed examination of the fossil showed no evidence of lungs, but plenty of evidence for gills.
I'm sorry, no. that's gill arches. You don't have evidence for the actual soft tissue of gills, my guy.
You literally don't. That's an inference. That's just an inference.
And the thing is, like,
True.
I know that I'm hammering this home again, but he's doing the exact same thing, right? It's like, oh, we don't have direct fossil evidence for the lungs, so I guess they weren't there. And then someone says, yeah, but did you read the paper? Because the only reason that the rib cage would be this way is if it had lungs. It's like, I don't care. All right, well, now he's going to go on about gill arches. Guess what? Gill arches are indicative of gills the same way that an imbricate rib cage is evidence of that particular mode of lung-based breathing. There's no difference here. It's just a double standard, not to emphasize his conclusion. The very thing he's accusing Neil Shubin of doing, of just making stuff up, is what he is doing. He's the one with a double standard that is based on his conclusion, not Neil Shubin.
I would also like to point out that I bet you if you go to this source here that he's got at the bottom, it says absolutely nothing of the sort that he's got on this slide right now. Like, I guarantee you that this is an elaboration on what I would imagine is the sole statement of Neil Shubin that you can infer lungs by the presence of the imbricate rib cage. And that's where all of the rest of this comes from.
Well, and you can tell it's not quoting, because when he does quote rod-like bones which help pump water over gills, that's in quotations. The rest of it isn't, meaning this is his synthesis of this. Yeah, but this is a man who has given every indication that he has no idea how to synthesize this information.
100%. Yeah, I mean, this is just... Okay, I'm going to let him keep going.
Fish have, including coelacanths. Second, could those fins really lift up that heavy head? It had, you saw the fossil. There's no connection of those bones in the front fins to the backbone. Any engineer will tell you got to have some strength there, structure, for that head to be lifted up on those fins. Otherwise, they're going to be worthless.
This is so engineer brained. It's crazy to me. Like the idea that he's like an engineer would tell you that the morphology is not sufficient. That's so weird because all of the anatomists say that it is, and they've done biomechanics work using extant individuals like extant lungfish, extant sarcopterygians to show that yes, it could lift its head up. And you don't need to have a connection to osteological material to have action, right? The hyoid bone in a human is connected to nothing. It floats free. It's muscle attachments all the way. It's ridiculous.
Plus, I do want to point out again.
Just shout out to all of our worm viewers today.
Yeah, who have no skeletal connections to anything. I also want to point out that the connection to the axial skeleton for the pectoral fins is through the pectoral girdle, which itself in Tiktaalik is only beginning to separate from the skull. If you look at skeletal reconstructions of Tiktaalik, you can see that the pectoral girdle is still very closely associated with the cranial bones, but it's separated just enough that now it has a neck. The thing that he's saying it doesn't have is essentially the thing it does have.
It's straight up just an uninformed slide here, right? That second section there, it has no genuine operational hips, shoulders, elbows, wrists, or fingers. What are we meaning when we say this, right? Because Tiktaalik has a humerus and ulna radius, a femur, a tibia, and a fibula, proto-metacarpals and metatarsals, and it's capable of and the rays that are your precursors to digits. And all of these work together to give it a fully functioning limb that is a step above what we see in living sarcopterygians like coelacanths and in ancient sarcopterygians like Eusthenopteron. It is objectively more mobile and objectively more powerful. And moreover than that, he's not going to talk about the pectoral muscles that are absolutely cut in Tiktaalik at all.
Yeah, well, the thing is, he's basically just complaining that it's so transitional that it doesn't count.
It's too transitional. No,
it's obviously not an arm like you would see in a salamander, which is what I think this thing just directly evolved into because I don't know what I'm talking about. And it's obviously not just a fin. So it must be useless and nonsense and not a transitional form, even though what you're pointing out there, Guy, Helmet, is specifically the reason it is transitional. And that's the thing that creationists do all the time. They're like, well, this isn't nearly enough like a human, and it's not nearly enough like a chimpanzee, so I guess it's nothing. It's like, no, dude, you're pointing out why it's transitional.
like they ask for an ape man, you give them an ape man, and then they're like, no, not like that, right? Like that's the summary of the situation. And they also don't understand that, and we talk about this a lot, but individual structures are themselves mosaics. So the combination of the structures gives you a mosaic organism, but the individual bones themselves are also mosaics. They have basal and derived aspects. To put it another way, aspects of an ancestor and of a descendant.
You can even see that in Tiktaalik. Like you look at the radius and ulna, and they are not arranged such that the wrist bones are entirely distal to the radius and ulna, which they are in actual tetrapods. That's because the radius and ulna themselves are transitional. But if you look at even earlier, stem tetrapods like Panderichthys or Eusthenopteron, they're even less like what we see in current tetrapod radius and ulnae. Because, of course, like Erica just said, the individual bones themselves are mosaics of derived and basal traits in transitional forms.
Right. And again, like echoing back what we've said multiple times already, but I'm hoping if I repeat it enough times, it will accidentally get through. The mosaics aren't mosaic because they're fitting that given environment. Like they can't be ascribed to common design. They carry aspects of them that are inherited from an ancestor, and then they have aspects of them that will be retained to a descendant. They have synapomorphies, right? Like this is not, creationists crack open a biology textbook and look at the end bolded terms challenge, difficulty impossible. Like I'm begging them to do this. Okay.
So it sounds here like he's just complaining that it doesn't look like the tetrapods that he knows and loves. It's not exactly the same thing. It like you said, it's too transitional. The other thing is, I mean, honestly, an ending engineer would conclude that that this is perfectly able to support some weight here. I'm confident that that's not representative of an engineer's assessment of this. And then lastly, if this were an informed discussion, like would he really be a guest on Standing for Truth?
Great question.
True.
So really quick, guys, I am gonna have to go. My phone is about to die. I need to go back to civilization, but I might stop back in later. I really have loved debunking creationists with you guys. This is an epic panel, and everybody knows like debunking creationists is one of my favorite things, especially talk about transitional fossils. I was hoping I might get to stick around enough for Australopithecus. I mean, I love Lucy, but there's so much more. And oh well, I might pop back in again later, but it was truly an honor. Thank you for having me on, Erica. And Doc, I will be seeing you in Wyoming in just a few days. I cannot wait. So everybody wish us luck. Hopefully we can find lentil, and it's going to be, hopefully a lot more dinosaur fossils as well. So yeah, cannot wait.
Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Thanks, Grayson. Take care, dude.
And on that note, I think I am actually going to run to the gas station quick and get a 6-pack.
Don't worry. We'll hold the fort down.
I'll be listening along. If I have any comments, I'll text you, Dapper.
Okay.
You can be the voice of a dinosaur.
All right.
Yeah, you can be the emissary here. All right, I'm gonna let Helmut finish. Or sorry, continue.
Yeah.
And there are a little bit of bones, just like a coelacanth has bones in its fins, but no connection. Telic and Tiktaalik has no genuine operational hips, shoulders, elbows, wrists, or fingers. It was all a forced fit based on what they wanted to believe.
They found it in one piece, Helmut, right? Like they found the arm together. There's pictures of the thing. It's like articulated.
Yeah.
It's not very big. What do you mean it was a forced fit?
And the thing is, like, these joints are operational. They're just not going to work the same way that your homologous joints do. But again, that's because it's transitional. That's the whole point.
Like, okay. What would you predict then? Like, if you're Helmut and you're playing devil's advocate, you're being the evolutionist here. What do you think a transitional form should look like? Because I'm struggling. Go ahead.
He doesn't have an answer to that question, right? Because that's the thing I've actually done, right? I've asked creationists personally, well, what would count? And ultimately, the answer that I come away with is there isn't anything that could possibly count because I don't want there to be transitional forms. At which point you just say, well, okay, but you're not having the conversation that you think you're having.
Yeah.
You think you're giving reasons why it doesn't work, but you don't have any reasons why it could. So your reasons why it couldn't don't really mean anything.
Well, at that point, we're done, right? Like the second that you're saying that it's possible that God could just create everything in 6 literal days and have your little hyper evolution and the global flood and whatever, and it's going to look identical to evolution, identical to how that plays out. And you're also going to have to invoke miracles for things like the heat, whatever. This is fan fiction. We're arguing about fan fiction at that point, and it's not more complicated than that. All right, Helmet.
Leave. Tiktaalik is clearly another example of a large bottom-dwelling fish.
I mean, he's not entirely wrong.
Look at it.
It is also that. Like, it's not that, right? It is something that was probably living on the bottom of relatively calm pools of water. We can probably tell because, it's got those on-top eyes. Why have that if you're not living, somewhat more or less on the bottom? Also, these fins that are able to support some weight probably started evolving to do that in order to do things at the bottom of, like, lakes and rivers and whatnot. So he's not wrong that it's a bottom-dwelling fish. But the thing is, that doesn't make it not a stem tetrapod. That doesn't make it not a transitional form between things like Eusthenopteron and later things like Acanthostega or Ichthyostega. So it's like calling Lucy, like, well, Lucy was just an upright walking savanna-dwelling ape. Like, yeah, that's kind of part of the point.
And well, the thing is, again, they have these through-line characteristics that link them to an ancestor and that link them to a descendant. Not in a direct lineage in the sense that we're talking about anagenesis or anything here, but we're talking about groups begetting groups. We're looking at a further specification of organisms. I don't understand how that doesn't sink in. Like, again, they just fall back on this whole, it looks really transitional, but it lived in a transitional environment. So what are we to expect? And it's like, okay, but then how is your hypothesis actually distinguishable from evolution? Period. Like, how would you distinguish? What kind of data could parse them out? There isn't any. Right?
Well, that's actually that's a really interesting point from sort of a. I know nobody debates you anymore, Erica, because you kept wiping the floor with everybody. But the rest of us that they'll actually still talk to, you guys have kind of hit on, I think, like a really effective methodology for debating this issue, which is that you start with this concept of, okay, so I want to establish some ground rules. So you're saying I have to prove it. I have to give you a transitional form. Okay, I'm going to try and do that difficult job. So what exactly do I need to do? What is it that, what is my goal, right? What are the characteristics of a transitional form? And let me suggest some to you. And then you go through and you start suggesting all of these synapomorphies and all of these different things, right? And you say, so would this be something that you would want? Would this be something that you would want? Would this be something that you would want? And of course, it feels to them like you're building, a more and more difficult to climb sort of thing, right? And it's like, okay, so all of those things, it would have to have all of those things in order for me to be able to do it. That's a heck of a mountain to climb. Is there anything else you can think of that you think a transitional form needs to have? And this would probably be the better part of the debate, right? It would be just establishing, this is what you're expecting of me. Okay, Tiktaalik, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Right? And you just they're like, what? What do you mean? And it's like the debate kind of ends quite abruptly. And you're like, no, Tiktaalik has all those things. All those things we spent an hour and a half establishing that you think it needs, it's got them all. So you're welcome. And the person just kind of like, wait, what? Right? It's so I don't know.
Well, and that's the thing, right, Mr. Anderson? Because I feel like the move from there, I'm imagining having this conversation with Donnie, right? My go-to for the semi-educated creationist who cribs some stuff here and there and changes on a dime, and he loves the debate bro stuff. I think he'd be a perfect person to cut that out on. Here's what he would do. He would say, well, just because it has all of those characteristics, who's to say it doesn't just live in a transitional environment? And that's when you would hit them with, we agreed on these characteristics of a transitional. How then do you actually distinguish it? How then do you actually parse a real transitional, bona fide transitional versus something that God created to look exactly like that in your 6,000-year-old Earth Noachian deluge model?
And that's the thing, is that's where he will immediately go.
Dapper is back.
Oh, Dapper's back?
As soon as you present him with the answer,
I'm gonna head out. If you're still going later, I'll be back later. I just want to say on this, how this debate would go with Donnie. You know how this would end, right? Yes, I agree. Yes, that's reasonable. Yes, I agree. Okay. Tiktaalik, that's not my wallet.
That's not my wallet.
Dan, before you go, we have a question from Doc Dino, who said, so when is the debate with Dodgeball Donnie, or is he still running?
Wait, for me?
It said for Dan, so to Dr. Dan. So when is the debate with Dodgeball Donnie, or is he still running?
That dude will never talk to me ever again.
That seems
just straight up. It will never happen.
Unless you catch him on an open mic.
Unless I catch him on an open mic, but he always moderates the open. See, when I pop in, suddenly he's the moderator, right? That's yeah. So,
well, and,
all right,
and
folks,
what he does,
I will be back later.
Bye.
He'll sick Sam on you, Dan. He'll sick Sam on you with the pre-sup buffer, and then.
Oh no.
Yeah. Right. All right. Later, everybody.
Bye. I have no patience for pre-sup. I just don't.
I don't care. I don't care. I do not care about pre-sup. I care a negative amount about pre-sup. It doesn't matter. It is intellectually lazy. And the way that I conclude it every time is like, okay, like you make one more presumption than I do. We have all of the same things. We accept all the same shit. I say I don't know where it ultimately comes from. You say that God did it. That's you're presuming one more thing than I am. It's simple as. Like I don't know what okay. Anyways, let him.
Well, your tactic in dealing with pre-sup is very effective. The idea that look, just maybe that's true, but it ain't science, right? So like the second it becomes not science, I do not care. Right?
Yeah,
and that's very effective.
Well, because at that point, the facade starts to fall, because it's like, okay, how much of the entire young earth creationism, creation science rejuvenation that seemed to happen right around the Kitzmiller versus Dover stuff is this idea that it's like, okay, if we can't keep religion in schools just because, then we'll force it back in under the guise of it's a reasonable scientific hypothesis. Of course, that didn't work, and they got battered in the courts and whatever, but that hasn't stopped them from still trying to do the whole same evidence, different conclusions. We have scientific reasons for believing this stuff. And it flummoxes every time. It's a house of cards. And the second you get them on that one miracle, it's game over, which is why I love the heat problem so much, because you don't have a choice.
Yeah, no, the heat problem is great. And
the whole thing falls.
Go ahead.
I mean, the heat problem really does mean that all available flood models that have been proposed so far are just physically impossible.
All of them.
Every single one. And that just means that the only reasonable conclusion right now is that there just wasn't a global flood. And I love that one of the greatest ones was like when Donnie said, well, we don't have any evidence of all of these rocks having reached their annealing temperature to get rid of fission tracks. So I guess there was no heat problem. It's like, no, dude, that means there was no flood.
Literally, Dapper. I remember the video I made in response to that, where I was like, it was literally it's not my wallet. I was like, okay, so when you don't find that when the fission tracks are still there, you're right. That means there wasn't enough heat, but that doesn't mean that the heat problem didn't exist. It means there was no heat problem created because there wasn't a global flood at all. It's that simple. But
sometimes that's the best you're going to be able to do is, I agree. That's not my wallet. And it's like once you get to that point, or alternatively, I'm going to have to think about it. You know what? I'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah.
And either one of those is like victory, right? That's a mark on your page. You're done at that point.
Well, and then it becomes musical experts, right? Like what they do then is they email all of these different experts and take what their opinion is, and then you debunk that opinion. It's whack-a-mole. And then once you've debunked all of the experts, they go back to the first expert and you get a good old-fashioned Donnie Deals fallacy. Have you considered A? And it's like, yes, we've done this already. Groundhog Day. But that's okay, because I'm a masochist. So, okay, we're going to let him go.
Look at the size of the fin in the actual fossil. It's very much smaller than almost all Tiktaalik cartoons, animations, and museum models. Compare it. And they've actually used some other animal fossils to reconstruct Tiktaalik, just saying, well, we don't have everything in Tiktaalik, but we've got some initial evidence, but it's not there.
So I know we have to stop every 6 seconds because everything he says is wrong. But no, what's going on there, to my understanding, for these reconstructions is that it's not that the bones aren't there, it's that the bones are there and they're quite damaged. And given the size and the shape and the articulation that we have them in, you can fill in additional blanks, particularly soft tissue blanks, by using extremely closely related and very similar morphologic features in extant taxa. But I don't understand what he wants there. Like, Dapper, correct me if I'm wrong, but the rays of teleost fish don't preserve all that often.
They don't tend to preserve. They're usually not really fully ossified as part of that. Sometimes they're, more or less. But also, one of the things that's interesting is, if you notice, when he looks at this, well, this is a replica, but like when he's looking at this replica of a specimen and he's pointing out that the fins aren't very big, there's a reason for that. In the fossil, those fin bones are on the ventral side. So basically, he's confused someone who's lying on their stomach, having their arms folded over, for someone who just doesn't have arms in the first place.
Right.
It's like, I'm sorry that people are presenting this fossil to you primarily from a ventral view, but a dorsal view, but that doesn't mean that the ventral side of the fossil doesn't exist. And guess what? That's where those bones are. You can see it if you actually look enough for ventral views of the fossil, or there are places where you can find CT scans of the fossil that include the bones that he's complaining about not being there. So, like, it's just there. You can look for it.
The Tiktaalik material is so available at this point that there's just no excuse. There's not an excuse to not. And you're right, Dapper. It didn't occur to me until just now. We haven't seen a single ventral view of this thing. Not from him.
It doesn't look very nice from a ventral view, right? It's not been prepared to be presentable in a ventral view, so people tend not to photograph it that way. But that doesn't mean that the ventral side doesn't exist and hasn't been addressed in papers. It has. It does.
Yeah, and I like this little bit here that he says he has the Harvard Museum and others shows Tiktaalik propping itself up with arm-like fins. The fossil, however, has no evidence of joints and adequate structure to have any chance of supporting its weight, even in water. What?
That's just a lie, basically.
Like that's just blatantly false.
Sorry, it has no evidence of joints? How does that fall? I mean, I'm not even a biologist, but I mean, like when there's two different bones and they're not fused together, that is in and of itself some evidence of a joint.
Yep.
Like,
yes.
Then I'm assuming that there's probably something like cartilage attachments, muscle attachment points on both sides, like tendon, attachment points. Like, there will be evidence of joints, and even I, as a non-biologist, can say there is some evidence of joints. Maybe he doesn't know what evidence is.
If you look at the CT scans, it's even more obvious. Like, you can just look at the joints; they're just right there. Now, are they exactly the same as a modern tetrapod joint? No, of course not, because you're not looking at a modern tetrapod. But they're also not the same as earlier stegocephalian fish joints, because again, it's not just a basal stegocephalian fish; it's somewhere in the middle. Sorry. Now, Dr. Dino says, this is for all of us. All creationists know about pictures is how to not take good ones, in situ at least, which is a reference to the whole Armitage thing, which I think we should wait for Doc to be back before we talk about that. But
yeah. we'll touch on that in a sec. So here's the arm, right? I mean, I don't know how you can look at something like this and argue that there's not a joint. This is what was preserved. I mean, and it was preserved, to my understanding, like this. So how are we going to make the argument that there's no joints on this thing? And furthermore, you have a clear humerus, you have a clear radius, you have a clear ulna in the preservation of this thing. Again, clear precursors to metacarpals. And I don't know as much.
You've also got the pelvic girdle. He says that doesn't exist. It's right there. That's the distalmost bone that you're looking at.
Yeah, the pectoral girdle, right? Like it's that simple. I just don't. I mean, again, I know how I keep saying like I don't know how this could happen. This doesn't make any sense to me. Like how you could not know this. You'd be genuinely this uninformed and like come on a show and talk about it. But at the same time, like we know why this is. He's an engineer. He's eyeballed the fossil and he's come to some conclusions and he's read some AIG articles about it, and that makes him qualified enough to muse on it, which is alarming. But that's why we're here. That's why we're here to be the vanguard. All right, I'm going to let him get back to it. All righty.
Here's one of the models. I've actually saw that model like that, museum in Chicago, Natural History Museum. And they show this creature kind of lifting its head out of the water. But there on the right, you see the actual fossil. That is just imagination. And again, there's no sign that the few little bones in the fin, which actually can help a fish swim, like coelacanth, has no connection to the backbone. Therefore, it's impossible. It's going to lift that heavy head out of the water.
It's genuinely just not. And like, again, I get the vibe that Helmut thinks that Tiktaalik is presenting a condition that is analogous or very, very similar to coelacanth. It's not. Tiktaalik's forearms and hind limbs are remarkably more developed as compared to coelacanth. That's why coelacanth can't push itself up out of the water outside of the fact that it lives in the deep ocean, but Tiktaalik could, because there is a clear difference in the morphology there. Again, no mention of the pectoral bone or the pectoral bones, the pectoral muscles, the pectoral muscles, the muscles themselves, which are preserved and show that this thing was just jacked. I mean, this thing was doing like flies like crazy. So I don't know.
Also, when this guy circles the visible from dorsal view limbs and says, see, there's no evidence of these fin joints, like only one of two things can realistically be the case here. Either he hasn't actually investigated the skeleton beyond looking at pictures of museum displays, or he has trouble with object permanence. Because essentially he's saying, I can't see the bones, so they must not exist. So I guess this guy must have a lot of fun with peekaboo.
For real. And like, again, as is always the case, when they're talking about a transitional species, they only ever want to talk about a single specimen. My understanding is that the Tiktaalik specimen that we tend to consider is the best preserved, but other ones also preserve aspects that the initial one didn't as well.
That's why you try to get more than one fossil of a particular species.
Exactly. So, all right, let me keep going.
The actual fossil front fins are small, flat, no evidence of joints. And the rear fins are almost non-existent. But they just want them to show like they're becoming large and muscular. It's not a transitional form. That cartoon never happened.
We have fossils for the fins. I don't know what he means, because like it's right there. Like sure, they are small compared to the pectoral fins. That's true, but like we have fossils for them. We even have fossils of like the sacral arches, not full, but like they're there. We know it had a sacral structure at the back of its body before the anus and the postanal tail, and it was associated with the hind fins. I don't know what he's getting at. I really don't.
So every single one of these reputed tetrapod features just is a feature that exists in Tiktaalik, and also one of them isn't even a tetrapod feature because it's also just in many Sarcopterygians generally.
Right.
Like, and I kind of can't believe it, but like his response to all of this was just like, nuh-uh.
Yeah.
No, that's not there.
I can't see it.
Fine. Anyways, all right.
So remember this.
Is, and you know what these guys tend to do is they'll have, like Donnie will have guys like this on to make these kinds of presentations, and then frequently there will be, if at all, it will be written questions only, which he will then select from, and they will, and of course there will be no follow-ups, right? And it's like, I don't know that at least the second claim there about the front fins being unable to support its weight would stand up to any kind of challenge. Like it seems to me that, I don't know.
The literature on this is extensive, right? Like, and because being able to support its weight is such an important aspect of a critter that is occupying this transitional environment and pulling itself up out of the water, right? That's the proposal, and it wasn't proposed in a vacuum. As Helmut likes to propose it, as if, like, you know, we're looking for Tiktaalik, we find Tiktaalik, and we're like, the minute we spot it in the ground, we're like, this is the one. This could definitely push itself up out of the water. But it's like, that's not the case. We pulled it out, we examined its morphology, we looked at the preserved aspects of the chest, the pectoral girdle, the bits of the hind quarters that were preserved, the head, all of these muscle attachment sites, the minutia of these arms, and came to the conclusion that yes, it could do that, because we have things to compare it to, right? Like modern Sarcopterygians.
Right,
so,
which is like mud skippers and stuff, right? So we know how big a mud skipper's muscles need to be in order to push it out of the water, and so we can say proportionately, is this big enough?
Precisely. It's a comparative method thing, which is what we use most of the time with paleontology. It's like we see how extant critters who have these features use them, and we apply them to the past. But like, it's crazy to me that he wants to ascribe this as like, they said that it could push itself up out of the water, but it can. His proof for that, you weren't here for this, Mr. Anderson, but his proof for that was, as an engineer, no engineer is going to tell you that it could do that. Huh?
Okay.
Well, see, that's where I would be like, okay, I want to dig in on this. So prove that to me. So what are you saying? What's the problem? Is it there isn't sufficient muscle? Is it that the bone is too thin? Is it that the joint would grind together? Like, what is it? Tell me specifically, because I don't know. But kind of my baloney detector is going off here like crazy. So like, you know, show me you said you're an engineer. You've done the engineering. So show it to me. I'd like to see it. And if you can't, then you're going to look a little bit like you're full of baloney.
Well, there's literature that's been done, direct experiments that were done to find out whether or not Tiktaalik could support itself, right? It has these external features and internal morphology in the case of the rib cage that support the fact that it had lungs. It had to have had lungs. Everything that has this combination of features in living critters has lungs. So does this thing. It's not an inference. The front fins being able to support its weight, already talked about that. It's in the literature. The arm, wrist, and finger-like bones, those are just there. Like, there's not a way to argue. This would be like looking at Archaeopteryx and looking at those feather impressions that are incredibly clear and being like, sorry, it didn't have feathers. And you're like, well, I don't know how to argue against that, because it's there. That is what it is. And then it does have a flattened skull with eyes on top. And more importantly, the skull roofing pattern on Tiktaalik is the same skull roofing pattern that you'll find in later tetrapods, which is important because he's trying to paint this thing as if it's just a fish. And it's got the labyrinthodont teeth as well, which is going to be important for tetrapods later. And those showed up in Eucenopteron, which is an older critter than Tiktaalik. You know, again, I'm not supporting like anagenesis here, but groups beget groups. So
you ever notice the tendency for creationists to say that's just and then name the wider taxon to which the modern examples belong? Like, that's just an ape. Yeah, well, so are you. That's just a fish. Well, so are you in this sense. Yeah. Okay.
It's still a finch. Yes.
Exactly.
It is. Like, it's unreal. All right, I'm gonna let him keep going.
Did it breathe using simple lungs? No, didn't have simple lungs. It had gills. The front fins, were they able to support its weight, at least just its head, to get out of the water? No, nothing there to do that. Doesn't.
What does that mean? Nothing there to do that.
Yeah,
okay.
All of us are fish.
Yeah.
Got it.
Nothing there to do that except the muscles and the bones. And
the doctor is back, bringing alcohol.
Yay!
Nice. Let me see. Okay. Eventually, oh my God, he goes for so much longer. Okay. I'm just going to
like bones. Also, it does have some bones in the.
Yes.
So what you were saying about creationists arguing that Archaeopteryx didn't have feathers, even though they're right there on the specimen? Ovind?
Does he do that? Does he really say that?
There we go. Okay, took my earbuds a second to reconnect.
Does Kent really say that? Does Kent say that Archaeopteryx didn't have feathers?
I'm not sure if he's fallen back on, oh, it's just a bird now, but at least in his old seminars, he says the feathers were painted on.
So he's
proven.
He's basing this on a study that was conducted by Fred Hoyle and I think one other guy.
Yeah, but
basically
calling it a
Hoyle's
study was
buddies.
very generous.
Well, yeah, there's that. So basically, Fred Hoyle and his buddy said that the feathers were actually impressions made by pressing chicken feathers into a thin layer of cement that had been placed onto the slab. Of course, there's a number of problems with that. One is that the limestone that composes the part of the fossil with the feathers is identical to just the entire rest of the slab. Nice. Yeah. Which means, of course, it couldn't have just been cement that was painted on, because it's obviously not. But also, even if that weren't the case, we have the counter slab. And the feather impressions are mirror perfect from the slab to the counter slab, which, again, is impossible if you were just faking it by putting cement on one side and pressing chicken feathers into it. And yet, that was what Fred Hoyle went with.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but later on, those same people said that, oh no, this is a flying reptile. It's
they thought
just
it was a
the feathers that are faked.
Yeah, they thought that somehow Archaeopteryx was a pterosaur, despite having none of the characteristic features of a pterosaur. And they said that it was a bird faked on top of a pterosaur skeleton, which just makes no sense at all.
I don't think they even said pterosaur, just flying reptile.
Yeah, I don't know what other flying reptile it would be, though.
So I've said this before, this isn't an original thought, right? This is from other people. Other people have voiced this as well. But the fact that creationists disagree so frequently on how to categorize these organisms that don't fit neatly into modern extant box, our quote unquote transitional species, the fact that they disagree on them so frequently, and the fact that individuals change their minds so frequently, going back and forth on where they fall, is some of the best support for the fact that these things are transitional out there.
Yeah, Dwayne Gish famously couldn't keep it straight from one debate to another, which of the obviously apes were obviously apes, and which of the obviously humans were obviously humans.
Right. And you know, the nature of their obvious classification also can't be defined. Like, they can't say what makes them.
Yeah, what is it that's so obvious?
Yeah, what makes it an obvious ape? Like, tell me more about that. I'm so curious.
I mean, I could tell you many things that would make many things obvious apes. It's just that would include modern humans.
Yeah, as could I. Is it their Wi-Fi molar pattern? Is it their mobile shoulder? Right? Like, is it their long developmental period? What is it?
You know,
must be the enlarged cranium.
I feel kind of bad for picking on him. Who am I kidding? No, I don't. But yeah, Kent Hovind has done that too.
Oh yeah.
I forget who it was, but there was someone he was debating who brought up, I think it was 4 different books that Kent was selling on his website. And each one had a different combination of 2 fossils being, these are just human, these are just ape.
Yep.
Or, yeah, he had, I think it was Homo erectus and some Australopithecine. One book said both human, one said both ape, one said the Australopith was an ape, Homo erectus was a human. And one said Homo erectus was an ape and Australopithecus was human.
No way. That's a really interesting
All 4 options.
I mean, Kent Hovind is just a criminal, though. Like, Kent Hovind belongs behind bars. Anyways, I'm gonna let this guy continue. We eventually got to get through the video.
Thin, and that's it. And the flattened skull with the eyes on top. Well, that's true. That is true.
Congrats.
But so do other fish today, like
flounder.
And have you ever heard of a dusky flathead fish?
I'm sorry, flounder, the fish that has both eyes on one side of the skull, has the same skull as Tiktaalik? Does this guy just not know what a flounder is?
He doesn't know what a flathead fish either, because look what he has here. Is Tiktaalik a flathead fish? Go ahead if you're out there watching this. Yeah, if you're watching this, go ahead and look up a picture of a skeleton of a flathead fish. And then take a look at the Tiktaalik fossil and come back to me. These 2 things, because I can't even imagine how little you have to know about morphology to come to that conclusion. Like, they're not even in the same ballpark anatomically as one another. The only thing they share is eyes on top of the head. That's it. That's the only thing.
But what about in terms of engineering?
Yeah. And the other thing about the flathead fish is that while, yes, the eyes are placed more or less on top of the skull, they still face laterally.
Yeah.
Unlike Tiktaalik, which mostly faced up and anteriorly. Yeah. Which, even your closest example for eye positioning isn't actually the same as Tiktaalik, which is just wild.
I genuinely think he saw this picture and he was like, hey, that kind of looks like Tiktaalik. And then he worked the entire argument off of that. Like, again, creationists are the masters of the eyeballing it method. It is no more complicated than that.
Okay, I'm sorry. This is going to be a bit of a tangent, but you said to look up flathead fish. I'd never heard of them before, so I did. I think you just solved like a 15-year-old mystery from my childhood.
Ooh.
Because
Helmet, not me.
Well, my family loves to go on vacations. They try to go on one a year, and for a few years in a row, they love to go down to Florida, specifically the Florida Keys. And one day I was snorkeling out there, and I saw this fish that I just could not identify. I think it was one of these. It looked just like these do.
Nice.
They're cool looking critters. I mean, I like them, but again,
it looked like an alien.
The only similarity, and I for those of you out there listening, the only similarity between Tiktaalik and this thing are the vague positioning of the eyes superficially, because as Dapper said, when you pull the skin off of these things and you look at how the orbits are positioned and angled, you're absolutely right. They're distinct again. This is, I mean, I'm pretty sure a flathead fish is a teleost fish. No, Dapper? Am I wrong on that?
It is, yeah. They're kind of catfish.
Yeah, okay, so they're a teleost fish. They're not even sarcopterygians. They're not even like in the same. They're not even similar to Eusthenopteron. Like it's. Anyways, I'm already tired of this guy.
Thanks for solving that mystery, I guess.
Good.
A fish that was caught off the coast of Australia. Flathead fish are dorsally compressed. Their body is wide but flattened and very low in height, and both eyes are on top of the flat head. Here's the fossil in the upper right, and here's an actual picture.
Where's the evolution?
Where's the evolution? It's Bible Radio on Twitter. He needs to add this to his list.
Oh, please don't give him ideas.
I'm gonna skip through some of this because he genuinely just talks about how similar they are. Here's another one, right? Another classic picture that he's using to compare it.
I'm still dumbfounded that he used flounders as a comparison.
Oh, he does say something here that's interesting. Yeah, the flounder as a comparison one is interesting. He says that because these flat-headed fish swim in groups, like as little triads, and he shows this little video here that I'm kind of flipping through as, to show them all swimming together. Because they all swim together, he was like, that's the reason we found 3 Tiktaalik in Ellesmere Island, because flat-headed fish swim in groups of 3.
You're joking.
I'm not kidding. You want to hear him say it?
Kind of, yeah.
Please,
all right, I'm bringing it back. I'm bringing it back. I
will say, I wouldn't rule out the idea that like there was some gregarious behavior in Tiktaalik. How would I rule that out? I don't know, maybe, but like, so it's just such a weird point to make.
Just it's so weird. Here, you listen to him say.
I got this with all respect on the internet. It's available, but take a look at how these things hide. And then if they get disturbed, they just take off. And what's interesting, when you really read about the fossil Tiktaalik, I said there were 3 creatures found. One was significant that they like to show. Well, look at the behavior of these fish. They like to sit in clumps, in families perhaps, in the sand, waiting for prey to come by, and then they, swoop up and grab something to eat. But they sit together in the sand, and then when disturbed, they all take off together.
Okay,
I'm going to speculate.
Wait,
the only way I can see this is relevant. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Dapper, let him finish this sentence because this is the cherry on top.
Wouldn't it make more sense that 3 or more of these creatures were sitting together in the sand, like this one, very well buried, and at the early stages of the flood, like Cambrian rocks, later, there was another tsunami of various stages during the flood, and they came in and swooped and buried 3 of them.
Okay, so first of all, I actually don't think it's a crazy behavioral reconstruction to say that maybe Tiktaalik was doing things like partially burying itself in substrate as an ambush predator and might have been gregarious. Like none of that seems crazy to me. Like, you know what? If that's your hypothesis, I'm willing to entertain that. I don't know how you would find evidence for it, but it seems plausible. But the only reason to make such a big point about this behavior for these flat-headed fish is if he thinks that that's actually what Tiktaalik is, but it's so obviously not. They're extremely different in every way they possibly could be. Flattish fish is not enough to draw the conclusion that these are the same animal. I'm sorry.
It's not even close, right? Like living coelacanth, to my understanding, and living lungfish, other sarcopterygians that are going to be the closest thing you can get reasonably to Tiktaalik as far as reconstructing behavior, are, again, to my limited understanding, pretty solitary critters. And I think it's crazy that he says, he's like, speculation. I think it's like reasonable to propose that much like this extremely distantly related animal that is like, I mean, gosh, it's Sarcopterygia. Dapper, what level of classification is Sarcopterygii?
So I don't know if it has a tax, like a Linnaean rank. I'm not positive.
Yeah,
but above order.
It's basically all of bony fish, right? So that's all of the fish that you've ever seen, except for sharks and rays and skates, right?
And teleos.
Well, no. Sarcopterygia is specifically
the lobe-finned fish, right? They're not
lobe-finned.
Right. So, you got to let me finish the sentence, guys. So basically, all the bony fish are divided into two big groups, right? At least among extant fish. You've got the lobe-finned fish, which includes the coelacanth and the lungfish and all the tetrapods you've ever seen. And then you've got the ray-finned fish on the other side, which is pretty much everything else that's a fish that you've ever seen that isn't cartilaginous, like rays and sharks and skates. So basically, there is no bigger division within bony fish than the division between what's the actinopterygian, the ray-finned fish broadly, which includes teleos fish as well as some others. And then on the other side, the sarcopterygian fish, or the lobe-finned fish, which includes, in the fossil record, lots of things, but today, just tetrapods, lungfish, and coelacanths.
So the reason I was asking is because, like, you know, I haven't buffed up on my fish taxonomy since I took zoology in college, but because this is such a greater division than at the order level, this would be akin to digging up a random mammal and being like, it must have pack hunted because living wolves pack hunt, and it's got like hooves and
no, it's worse.
It's like a monotreme or something.
It's worse.
It is
like
Tiktaalik's taxonomy: kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, subphylum Vertebrata, subclass something, and then superclass something, whatever you said, and then subclass Sarcopterygia, infraclass Tetrapodomorpha, clade Elpistostegalia.
Yeah,
genus Tiktaalik, species Tiktaalik rosea.
Hey, at least we can all agree Linnaean ranks,
they're silly,
are absurd.
Yeah, so subclass is the answer. Subclass.
But Erica, this is worse. This is much closer to saying, well, this hoofed creature that I just dug up was probably a pack hunter because tuna swim in schools and they're predators.
Right. Yeah. No, it's actually, you're absolutely right. It's analogous to that because you're right. It's the Sarcopterygians versus Actinopterygians. So it's like,
right. It's far worse.
Division. Yeah. But this is the problem, right? This is why you have to know your morphology before you get into this stuff, because he eyeballs the dusky flathead and he's like, I guess Tiktaalik must have been the same thing. And like, Helmet, this isn't above your pay grade. Like, you know, speaking directly to you here, not thinking that you will ever see this, but you're not a dumb guy. Like, you could read up on this quite easily, I think. But, you know, to reduce, this is very, again, sorry to my engineer friends out there, but this is very engineer brained, being like, well, biology can just be reduced to what I perceive as functional suites, completely divorced from phylogenetic relationships and morphology and behavioral ecology. Like, it's insane.
Also, one other big thing is, you know what the flat-headed catfish doesn't have that Tiktaalik does? A neck. Just gonna put that out there.
Or a humerus, or a radius, or an ulna, or metacarpals, or a femur, or a tibia, or a fibula, or metatarsals, or a pectoral girdle that appears tetrapodomorphic in nature, or a tetrapod skull roofing pattern, or labyrinthodont teeth. And you could go on and on and on.
But neither one has a tibula.
Yeah, none of them have a tibula. That's a Nephi special.
Genuinely, Erica, this is all just giving me flashbacks to your video talking with T-Rock and Sam about limestone.
Oh my god!
Like it's that level of painfully confident ignorance.
At least, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, I would rather hear this from literally anybody, any other living person on the planet than Sam. Like, as long as this is coming out of someone else's mouth, it's fine.
I don't blame you.
That guy is just, yeah, okay. Let him continue.
Together. Maybe the others escaped, but 3 of them are buried together, and that's exactly what the fossil looks like. It looks like a dusky flathead.
It really does.
After this, they mostly get into, I mean, actually, they talk about the Zekelme prints. That's really important.
Okay, good.
Because in 2010, they talk about 4 feet in the past. Tetrapod trackways from the early Middle Devonian period in Poland. These are the Polish footprints of tetrapods walking on open ground, and these are dated
they might be
397 million years ago, and what's now Poland.
So, let's see. I would honestly rather summarize this for everybody than listen to Helmet summarize the problem. Are you guys okay with that?
No, I'm a little tired of listening to Helmet. He clearly has no idea what he's talking about.
I really want to speed it up and switch videos. So I'm going to summarize the problem, and then we're going to switch videos. Is everybody chill with that?
Absolutely.
I'm ready for raw Matt.
Oh my god.
That is a big statement, my guy.
No. I'm not. I am way too sober for raw Matt. Like, it's not. I'm not even in the right ballpark.
I mean, Sam is a pain to listen to, but I will say at least he hasn't made a domestic violence joke to me on stream.
All right.
Raw Matt has done that and much more.
Yeah.
I'm saying that because Raw Matt did that.
Here's a fun thing. When Raw Matt was trying to describe the languages that the Old Testament of the Bible was written in, one of the languages that he mentioned was pre-Yiddish.
Oh my god. Raw Matt is okay. I have to reveal this, and then we'll do the Zekelme tracks, and then we'll probably have to catch up on super chats, and then we'll do the next video. Cool. And if you would take a look, those of you, I think Dapper might just be you, and John, if you guys would eyeball the list, we can decide which one we want to go on next, or if you could paste it in the private chat so everybody can see what we're picking from here. Because there's no way we're going to get through every single one of these videos. There's literally not a shot. So Raw Matt currently on, for those of you who don't know, who are tuning in from YouTube who might not know, Raw Matt is the much less informed sidekick of Standing for Truth, which is a young earth creationist ministry here on YouTube. Raw Matt is a former breatharian. He used to believe that you could drink could be much more reasonable. He used to believe that you could breathe your food, right? So you could just breathe and not have to eat anything. It's breatharianism. That obviously made him very sick, and I think that's why he quit. He's also been known for getting misidentifying teeth when the tooth is on the screen, like saying mammal, like the specimen doesn't have a molar when there's a jaw with a molar on the screen. And he's been known perhaps most prolifically for faking a published paper in PLOS where he which I think is actually +1, where he had submitted a paper on biblical genealogy and just photoshopped the +1 logo on the top. Got busted for that, recalled that. He's done a lot of really dumb stuff, and he's not very informed in general. But recently what he's been doing on Twitter is shilling a new type of cryptocurrency. And ladies and gentlemen, neither, both, and in between, all out there in my lovely audience, you're not prepared for what it's called. It's called biblical coin.
Not even Bible coin.
Oh, it is. It is horrific, and you can buy it on the Standing for Truth website.
Yep, Donnie, and you'll love this, Mr. Anderson. Sam is also one of the launching shareholders for biblical coin. So we might be very shortly looking at a trio of bankrupted creationists, which is, I think I'd be lying if I said that doesn't make me smile just a little bit.
Well,
how many
the problem isn't that the crypto coin is going to bankrupt those creationists. The problem is that it's going to bankrupt other people.
That's a really good point. That's actually a really good point. Yeah.
And what it could do to those creationists, though, which they need to be a little bit careful of, is it could put them in jail because cryptocurrencies are, now these days starting to be regulated by the SEC because they are basically stock. Like, we call them cryptocurrencies, but they don't function like currencies, right? They function as very, very volatile investment vehicles, the passwords to which you can lose. And it's like they've started a company and they're selling shares to widows and orphans, is kind of the term of art, without the proper filings, with the SEC, without the proper controls or anything. And that's how you get your Sam Bankman-Frieds out there. It's not good.
That is not good.
I'm not saying that Raw Matt is running a scam. I'm just saying it is very hard to find a crypto token that isn't a scam.
That's what I was going to say.
Maybe they just want to do this because of how much they idolize Kent. They're following in his footsteps.
Wait, did Kent make his own token?
Nobody did.
I just mean it becoming a felon.
Okay. Right. Okay.
I just want to know, how many biblical coin can I buy with 30 pieces of silver?
Enough to go buy yourself a field in the middle of Israel.
Oh God. Yeah, we'll see it now. Now, Mr. Anderson, now you've made me sad. I thought I was having a hearty chuckle about the whole situation, and now I'm sad because you're right. Innocent people are going to get caught up in that, and they do not deserve to be deceived that way. So now it sucks.
The biggest victims of creationism are creationists.
Yeah,
no, that's also true too.
Because the way that you make money as a crypto coin issuer is that you issue yourself crypto for free, and everybody else buys it, and then they're all worth the same, and then you dump yours and leave somebody else holding the bag.
Yeah. Right? Yep. Well, I'm going to bring it to a little easier of a topic now that I'm bummed out. The Zekelny trackway. The Zekelny
Glad you had me on.
I wanted quipping, not lawyer speak.
So I invited a literal lawyer.
So so the Zekelny tracks have been a really popular creationist argument for the past several years now. Basically, in 2010, they discovered a trackway in Zekelny, Poland, and these tracks, which there is quite a bit of dispute as to whether or not they actually are tracks. I'm inclined to believe that they are. I was kind of on the fence, but I got to talk to Dr. Alberg about it on Twitter, who was one of the guys on the initial paper, and I think he makes a pretty good case for it. Initially, the argument was that they were walking like outside of the waters, like terrestrially. These days, it seems to be, my understanding is that they're arguing for like a marine, sort of walking along the bottom of like a low level estuary or something like that, like walking along the bottom of the seafloor. Now, the key thing about these trackways, and the reason creationists love them, is because of that date. He gives here 397 million years ago. That's a little precise compared to what I've heard. I've heard a range of like 390 to 395, if memory serves, something like that. But the point is, they're older than Tiktaalik. Tiktaalik is something like 370, Dapper, 370 million years ago. And then
I believe that's about right, but I don't have it exactly in my brain.
Eustonopteron is 390. Tiktaalik, I believe, Tiktaalik might be 380. I think it's Eustonopteron 390, Tiktaalik 380, and 370 is, I believe, Acanthostega. So the point is, how do you have something that is clearly tetrapodomorphic walking before the first member of Tiktaalik? Now, I think the answer to this is extremely simple, which is that something does not go extinct just because it has descendants. Case in point being that, you still have wolves, even though dogs descend from wolves. It's a pretty simple relationship. Meaning that Eustonopteron, which appears a lot earlier, like we have much older Eustonopteron than this tetrapod trackway, could theoretically have yielded things like Tiktaalik, the Elpisostegalians, that then continued on to evolve these tetrapodomorphic features. And it just so happens that the Tiktaalik that we have and the Acanthostega that we have are later, more refined members of that group. Now, it could also be the case that Tiktaalik and Acanthostega are not actually the precursors to tetrapods. It could be that they are very, very similar to the precursors of tetrapods, but are their own thing. Elpisostegalians maybe are evolving kind of along their own route. A great example in hominins is Australopithecus and Homo versus Paranthropus. One of them leads to humans. One of them is very similar and ends up going extinct. right? If you'd only found Paranthropus and never found Australopithecus, you might conclude that Paranthropus is the ancestor of Homo, even though sometimes they're contemporaneous, because they've got very basal morphologies in many ways, but that would be an incorrect conclusion. The problem is we have an incomplete fossil record. Now, I'm going to share with you guys something really cool that I got from my exchange with Dr. Alberg on Twitter, and since it's public, like if the exchange is public, I feel comfortable saying this. He's talking about how his group, and he again worked on these Akelmi trackways, which are dated to 397 million years ago, has quite a few body fossils of critters that are not going to be published for a while, according to him on Twitter. But to me, what that would suggest is precisely that you've got some non-Elpistostegalian pre-tetrapod tetrapodomorphs that are quite a bit older. Now, what does that do for Tiktaalik? Absolutely nothing, because Tiktaalik is still this incredible proof of concept of a critter that does represent a massive transition between these earlier Sarcopterygians and later tetrapods. It may just not be that Tiktaalik is the ancestor of all modern tetrapods. This is an important concept. I talked about it a lot in a video a while back, but I think the easiest way to explain it to creationists is not to involve all the rest of that stuff, is to just say, nope, just because something is it has speciation, has peripatric speciation off of it, doesn't mean it has to go extinct. We still have dogs and we still have wolves, even though wolves descend from dogs. Theoretically, you could have it's like Acanthostega, or have Tiktaalik descend from Eusthenopteron, and Eusthenopteron and Tiktaalik both persist. And then you can have Acanthostega split off from Tiktaalik, and then all three are still persisting. None of them have to go extinct just because they have a descendant.
Yeah. The way I often put this in my videos is, hey, most creationists recognize at this point that the if humans evolved from apes, why are there still apes argument is a bad argument. It doesn't suddenly become a good argument if instead of humans and apes, you use dinosaurs and birds, or like Tetrapodomorpha and Tiktaalik. It never becomes a good argument just because you replaced the two different taxa you're talking about with two different taxa.
Right? Exactly.
Well, and the thing is, you say that like they've given up on birds being dinosaurs yet.
Well, and the thing is, the earliest I can find of a creationist of some clout complaining that the if humans evolved from apes and why they're still apes argument is a bad argument goes all the way back to like John D. Morris, the son of Henry Morris, who was at the time the director of the Institute for Creation Research. And way back then, I believe for like one of their magazines, he penned this whole thing about how that's a really bad argument. And he went and explained how evolution doesn't say that all apes would simultaneously start evolving into humans. It would have been a small subsection of apes that then evolved into humans while other apes evolved in different directions. And the thing is, he's right. I don't have notes for that essay other than like his conclusion that like, well, we know it didn't happen. Well, all right. Other than that, the entire little essay it's correct. And yeah, creationists have been getting better about that when it comes to apes and humans. But for some reason, they cannot generalize that principle. And so I still get things like, yeah, well, if dinosaurs are birds, and how come there was a dinosaur found with a bird skeleton in its stomach?
Yeah, it's honestly shocking, like that this argument still gets played out, because you're right, Dapper. And Anya, I don't know why it never occurred to me, but this really is just a repackaging of the if humans come from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Like it's just swapping out the taxa. Okay, so I think we're gonna be done with Helmet. That's the end of this chunk. If you want to see more chunks, just wait a couple of weeks and they'll come out once a week. And if you want to watch the whole thing now because you just can't wait, you can again find the stream on my channel in all of its 11-hour long glory. I do intend on doing like a nice edited video on tetrapod evolution, so you can expect that sometime within the next 5 years. I don't know, it's on the list. I'm doing the best I can. Make sure to subscribe to all the folks that were in that like chat there, because they all rock. From the bottom of my gentle and of course very modern heart, I want to thank you for being a curious primate, and I'll see you real soon next time.